This is the Benefits Buzz Podcast, your weekly pulse on what's happening in the world of employee benefits. Brought to you by your friends at WEX, who believe in simplifying benefits for everyone. Now listen up and let's get buzzed. Hey everyone, it's another episode of Benefits Buzz. I'm your host, Eric Piela, and I'm joined with Kelsey Burgad. What's up, Kelsey?
Hey, welcome. Welcome to my show.
Welcome to the Kelsey Burgad Show.
Well, you make it sound that way when you always kick it off that way.
Well, oh gosh, I know what we love to give each other a lot of crap. That's how long we've been doing this a lot. This is like
a lot of hours
30th episode this season. We do. And speaking of really entertaining and fun time with each other, I'm super fun and excited about this episode, mostly because I've been waiting for this the whole time. We're talking about VEBAs, and so I think of VEBA Las Vegas.
That is, I get why you.
I'm not sure if I'm the only one who's ever thought of that. Maybe I'm not.
Probably.
I have a sickness. It's like a jukebox thing. I can't help but just start randomly singing songs. But boy, I'm really digressing in this intro. Maybe we can cut this out in post-production. VEBAs. So let's talk about VEBAs. This is so when we were pulling that up, apparently the laws for VEBA have been around for like 100 years, but I'm not joking when I say this. Like I literally did not hear much about VEBA until a couple months ago. So something's up, right? And we thought we need to talk about.
We need to have a conversation about this. Yeah, they've definitely been trending. So we brought on two guests to help us talk about it.
Yes. And we're excited to introduce those guests now. We have got Jonas Sauvé, Senior Product Manager at WEX. Jonas, you're an old friend of ours on the podcast. Welcome back. And
hey guys, great.
Yeah, well, we're glad you're here. And of course, we have a newcomer, Phil Kading. Welcome. Phil is the Senior Director of Strategic Business Development. Woo, that's an awesome mouthful. Welcome, Phil, to the show.
Eric, Kelsey, thank you. I've finally made it, so I feel pretty good. Right now.
Welcome to Kelsey's show. Well, let's dive in here because we're feeling a little squirrely today. We want to just, we got to start from the basics here. If not for everyone else, at least just for me, please. What is a VEBA? What does it stand for? Can we just start with the 101 stuff? Let's start there and we'll get deeper as we go here.
Sounds good. I'll take that. So VEBA, VEBA, stands for Voluntary Employees Beneficiary Association. So Eric, say that 5 times.
I can barely say your title, Phil. Don't.
Right. So we're gonna refer to it as VEBA from here on out for obvious reasons. But it's like Eric said, it's been around a long time. It's a benefit that allows employers to support employees' healthcare needs on a pre-tax basis, and really helps them become better healthcare consumers. It's similar to our friends in the HSAs, FSAs, HRAs, and we'll get to that in a sec. But it's different in a lot of ways in that it's employer funded. We'll dive into that a little bit, and not consumer funded at all. In the funds, those funds that are contributed are landing in a tax-free irrevocable trust, which is very different than our HSA, FSA friends. And then often it's paired with an HRA as well.
Yeah, interesting. I mean, so it sounds like it's a mix between an HRA and an HSA, right? Because there's investment potential. But then when you say employer funded, I think of the HRA. So can you break down maybe what the differences are or how they're alike?
Yeah, and we'll get into a little bit about that later, but how it's alike is from an HRA perspective. A VEBA typically has a paired funded HRA. Now, when I say funded, as most of the listeners are going to know, HRAs are notional, right? They're not real until spent. VEBA HRAs are funded. So those are real funds going into that trust account. And again, it's a trust account, which is different than an HSA specifically. But the main part is it's funded, right? Now, beyond the contributions, when you think about the HRA from a claims perspective, it's the same as our traditional HRA, right? So when somebody uses their debit card or somebody submits a manual claim, that's happening in the same fashion as our traditional HRA as well.
Okay, this is good because I feel like this is super detailed, but I think we need this, and I'm trying to keep up, and I think this is great. Hopefully those that are listening are catching the nuances here, and I think this is why we have to have a podcast episode on this, because there are some definite nuances. And so let's keep going a little bit more here, and I want to make sure I get this. We keep questions in our back pocket, and I've got one here. I want to make sure I say it right here. Okay, so how do HRAs funded by a VEBA trust, right, compare with common benefits such as an FSA or HSA, like we've alluded to? I'd love to hear the differences as we continue to kind of, again, find out the minutia, the differences between all these plans.
Yeah, I think Phil did a great job of introducing kind of some differences around where the funds are held, when they're available, et cetera. But there's also a lot of other similarities to FSAs and HSAs. Phil alluded to the contributions being employer funded, not consumer funded, whereas HSAs and FSAs are typically funded by the employee first, or largely funded by the employee with employer contributions on top, right? And then with HSAs and FSAs, of course, there's typically an annual max for those, or there is always an annual max for those. But with the VEBA HRA, there is no annual max. So there's a lot of flexibility for the employer to determine their budget and fund it accordingly. Eligible expenses, of course, are a critical piece of these types of plans too, right? You provide the dollars, but what can you use them for? Just like HSAs and FSAs, 213D expenses all day. And but of course, that can be customized by the plan, like another HRA that you might have set up in the past or be familiar with. Now, where it gets a little bit interesting is access. And when I say access, I'm really referring to when can employees utilize their dollars, right? HSA while employed and while terminated. FSAs really just while employed. And so VEBA funded HRAs are unique from the perspective of the employer can determine when those funds are available to the employees. So they're always going to be available in retirement or termination or post-employment, but the employer can choose whether or not employees can spend it while they're actively employed. And so it is a portable plan. They terminate it, it goes with them. So there's a flare of the HSA on that regard related to access ongoing post-employment. Now, we should also talk about funds availability, right? So if you think about an FSA and a typical HRA, typically paired with a calendar year or a fiscal year, VEBAs are different and kind of like HSAs from the perspective of they are open-ended. There is no concept of an open or an annual plan year that resets each year. There is no use it or lose it or rollovers, runouts, grace periods. They have access to their funds ongoing. And for the sake of the audience, I'm just going to assume you guys know rollover, runout, grace period terminology. For the funds, right? So the funds are held by the trustee, meaning the participant does not own those funds. If you think about the experience for an HSA, if you have an HSA, you can go pay out of pocket, request a distribution. You're ultimately responsible for making sure it's for eligible expenses and maintaining documentation if you get audited. But from a VEBA standpoint, that's not the case, right? They can only be spent on eligible expenses. Claims are adjudicated, and you can pay out of pocket for ineligible expenses and then ultimately pay a fee like you could with your HSA. And I know I'm going a little long here, but let me wrap up with investing, one of my favorite areas of some benefits. So similar to the HSA, the VEBA funds can be invested, triple tax savings, if you've heard that benefits buzzword, contributions, earnings, withdrawals for eligible medical expenses. All three are tax advantaged. And unlike some other retirement plans, so VEBAs can be, of course, used in retirement. They're portable, they're invested, right? You can choose to hold on to those funds until you're retired. Of course, plan design may or may not allow spend earlier, but there are no mandatory age requirements to start withdrawals. So if you're familiar with things like IRAs, you can run into mandatory minimum withdrawals, and VEBAs don't have that. So a nice perk and benefit there. And then lastly, with HSAs, oftentimes they may or may not have a cash threshold, meaning you must keep 1,000 or a specified amount of money in cash before the remainder of the money above and beyond that can be invested. With VEBAs, they may or may not have a cash threshold, kind of like the HSA.
That was, I'm like learning trial by fire here
Yes.
because I'm so used to, talking about FSAs and HSAs and HRAs. So when you're blending all of these together, my mind is just all over the place. So I just want to recap really quickly for the employers who are maybe new to VEBAs and are like, hey, this sounds interesting. I want to learn more. Which parts of what you just covered are customizable by the employer? So which parts can they pick and choose? I just want to recap that again because there were some things that were, this is just how a VEBA is. And then there were some things where it was like the employer gets to pick. So can you just recap which ones the employer gets to decide?
Yeah, for sure. I think that's a great way to summarize my long-winded answer there. So contribution, the employer determines their budget, and there is no max. Eligible expenses, we'll talk about those a little bit later and how they can vary when employed or not, but 213D expenses that can be customized within. Access, can employees spend while employed? Yes or no? They're always going to be able to spend when retired or terminated. So customization, something about funds availability, we kind of hit that. Investing, you're not particularly probably going to determine that at the employer level. That's probably going to come down to your administrator and what they allow. So I would say those are the real key items that from an employer standpoint are easily customizable.
That's great. Thank you. So the next thing that I kind of have in my head is we always talk about how these plans pair together, or how they work together to help employees like get the most out of their benefits package, right? So are there certain benefits that a VEBA can be paired with versus ones that maybe they can't?
Yeah, employers who are familiar with other HRAs are probably going to see a lot of similarities in this area. So a VEBA funded HRA, it's going to be compatible with a medical FSA. However, if they want to be compatible with an HSA, then the VEBA either has to be frozen. That might be a term you hear when learning about VEBAs. So really preventing consumers from being able to spend or file claims, use their debit card, etc., or limiting the VEBA to certain eligible expenses, like a limited HRA, right? Dental, vision, preventative care expenses, or the term post-deductible VEBA, like a post-deductible HRA. After a consumer hits the threshold for out-of-pocket expenses or deductible, then that limited VEBA can convert to a full VEBA. But there's a slight nuance that's a little bit different here from the perspective of, I mentioned a little bit ago, VEBAs are open-ended, whereas health plans and deductibles are annual. And so similar experience to a limited and post-deductible HRA, but those are typically paired with an annual health plan. So with the VEBA being open-ended and ongoing, just a little bit of a different take on the administration there, but for the consumer, ultimately very similar.
That's great. Thanks, Jonas. I know there's a lot to unpack there, so I really appreciate you doing a great job of doing that one and for your great summaries. One of the cool things that working at WEX is that we do get to see when there's peaked interest for certain types of benefits. And as Kelsey alluded to early in the show, is we've seen a lot of interest in VEBA. So my next question has to be a bit around why, but what type of employers are typically offering VEBA? So who's inquiring? What are we seeing?
Yeah, and I can take that. I want to add one thing to Jonas's answer before as well. One of the, Kelsey, your question about how it can be customized, and from a contribution perspective, again, it's coming from the employer. So they, what they contribute for is fairly open, right? And open to how they set up their plan design. So are they paying out on accumulated PTO or just a lump sum monthly? There's a lot of flex in how they can set that up. And we've seen a lot of different ways that employers have skinned the cat there. So there's definitely flex there as well. So I wanted to add that in there. But as far as the type of employers that take advantage of VEBAs, typically, it's public sector. And when I say public sector, mainly municipalities, states, counties, cities. Also union groups, as well as higher education institutions. And there's some tax advantage there from employer perspective, as Jonas pointed out, from a participant perspective. And it also, the usage of a trust reduces liabilities. But that's where we see VEBAs most popular.
It's good to know. On the flip side, is there any restrictions on who can offer a VEBA?
You mean enroll?
Sorry, yeah.
Yeah, so when it comes to being able to roll from the participant level, of course, the employer has to offer the VEBA up front, but then the employer also gets to determine, like many other benefits, which class of employees are eligible to enroll in the VEBA. And so first and foremost, the employee must be part of an eligible class for that offering. And they also must be enrolled in the employer-sponsored health plan. So the employer offers a health plan, they want to enroll in VEBA, they have to enroll in that. So it's a little bit similar to an HSA in terms of like an enrollment requirement, in that case, an HDHP or high deductible health plan, but kind of like a lot of other HRAs, effectively integrated with the group health plan. You know, integrated is probably not the right word because it's technically separate, but to be enrolled in it, you do have to be enrolled in that group health plan to be eligible. And then also, you know, really with that VEBA HRA being ongoing, open-ended, right? So future changes to your enrollment can affect your eligibility to get contributions ongoing, but ultimately the dollars sit in that trust and are available to the consumer based off of the other plan requirements or plan set of details.
Okay, so in the spirit of continuously comparing this to the products that I actually know, I think about it like I think about an HSA, and I know that employers, when it comes to contributions, can choose, you know, when they want to contribute to the plan, right? And you mentioned that it's employer funded solely, that a participant isn't actually like putting any dollars into this. So does the employer also get to choose like the frequency? Can they say we want to contribute all of our money up front, or we want to do it on a quarterly basis, or what does that look like?
Yeah, there's really total flexibility in terms of both amount and frequency. Typically, employers are probably spreading it out throughout the year, whether monthly, quarterly, payroll. They can do lump sum upfront annually, of course, but a lot of flexibility there based off of what they'd like to do. And we do see some employers decide to provide some funding in retirement as well. So there's some flexibility on the back end there too. But really in the spirit of comparing these to other benefits, you know, I think the natural thing there to double click on is things are funded. What can they spend it on, right? We already talked about 213D expenses, but I think, you know, something else we should add in addition to that is when somebody is employed and what they can spend on if the plan allows them to, of course, versus if they're no longer employed, terminated, or retired, how does that eligible expense list change? And it's a little bit unique of a plan from the perspective of medical insurance premiums, of course, not paid with pre-tax dollars elsewhere, do become eligible post-employment. And then also another thing that isn't dependent on employment is dental, vision, or similar premiums not paid under ACA, of course, can be paid from the VEBA. So there is some flexibility there related to premiums and eligibility, and ultimately the medical side of that is tied to the employment status. But lastly, Medicare premiums as well for people who are post-employment. So 213D with a little asterisk related to employment status.
Awesome. Thanks, Jonas. I love this kind of comparison thing because it works great for me. So I'm going to continue your theme. One of the things I love about my HSA is the investing feature, right? And I know you mentioned that with VEBAs. Is it apples to apples? Are there differences? Love to hear about how investing works with VEBAs.
Yeah, so it's a great question, Eric. So as far as investing, it's very similar to an HSA or 401k, right? A similar setup, but a similar experience and sensation for participants. Again, a lot of this, and Jonas alluded to it, depends upon your administrator, right, and who you choose. But typically, participants are going to have a wide array of choices about what they can invest in: mutual funds, large cap, small cap, target date funds. Some administrators will offer a cash product too. Others will not. And essentially that's first dollar investing, and some will offer a cash product, but you can still invest first dollar. Also, much like, you know, 401k, HSA, participants can move their money around from an investment perspective as they move into different life stages or something changes. They can pull back. They want to go to a target date fund, which is a little bit more conservative. And as things change, they can do that. Rebalancing features, those things are going to be very similar to your 401k HSA. And then, of course, the probably the most important part, and Jonas already hit on it twice, I think, is that it's tax advantaged, right? Much like HSA, right? That triple tax advantage is super important as well. But at the end of the day, very similar to an HSA and 401k investment experience.
So we have covered so much, and I feel like we've done a really good job of covering, someone who maybe doesn't know what a VEBA is, like they've got a good understanding, I think, of what this product is and how they can customize the plan. And I think for those who are maybe a little bit further along in the process, who are really considering a VEBA, we've gone into some details about why it might be beneficial, the tax advantages, and how they can really get nitty gritty with that plan design. But I'm just curious, is there anything else that you think from an employer perspective they need to be aware of when it comes to VEBAs? Any tips you can give them if they're, considering implementing one? What's one last piece of advice you can give to them?
Yeah, so I'd start with the administrator, right? So really, when you think about the comparing and contrasting these benefits, let's ultimately go back to the fact that many of them are they're complementary, right? And so you can offer a VEBA with an FSA, an HSA. FSAs are subject to COBRA, other HRAs are subject to COBRA. And so can your administrator support all of those benefits? And if they can, they're probably going to streamline your life by being able to bundle everything up in one product. But then related to that, when we think about spending dollars across benefits, does your administrator offer a stacked debit card for all your benefits? And how does plan ordering work? Well, if you can save your VEBA dollars until retirement, you might want to pay your FSA first. So having a conversation about that, it would be important. We talked about, controlling spend based off of a limited status, a frozen status, a full access status, or even varying it based off of whether you're employed or not. How is that controlled? And do you have an interest in those areas based off of how your VEBA is structured? Of course, we already talked a little bit about investing. Is there a cash threshold? What are the investment options? And then, of course, fees. How are they structured, right? Is there a monthly fee per participant? Are there basis points that are charged on the cash assets or the invested assets, et cetera? So in quick order, those are kind of the things that I would highlight. Phil, did I miss anything?
Yeah, I mean, just to reiterate, the understanding the investment options, how it matches up with your participants. Is it going to be advantageous for them and interesting to them? Is their first dollar investing? In making sure that that's going to be a fit, I think is really important with that, the custodial piece and the trust aspect within a VEBA. But I think, Jonas, I think you hit everything else.
Well, thank you so much. This is a great.
I learned a lot.
Yeah, I want to say this is a great foundational, and actually, I think time flew by, but a nice, thorough understanding of what VEBAs are, and I'm excited that we had a chance to cover it on the podcast. If there's a lot of people like us who are learning a lot along the way, we want to thank both you and Phil and Jonas for sharing your wisdom with us on this 100-year-old tax law that has brand new flair with it. And so I definitely see in the flexibility why there's an interest in there, and I appreciate you outlining all the details of it. Appreciate it.
Awesome. Thanks for having us. Glad I could find it.
Thanks, guys. See ya. WEX is in the business of simplifying benefits for everyone. Now, although we certainly hope our podcast sparks some aha moments, like that was pretty cool, but of course we cannot provide legal, investment, or financial advice. And, well, therefore, nothing shared in this podcast should be interpreted as such. We encourage you to seek out appropriate professional advice regarding your plans. Hey, congratulations! You made it through our disclaimer. Thanks for listening.